All right, guys, you're looking at a new one, the XFX GTX 285, and there's been a lot of excitement over the GTX 295, and everybody kind of forgot about the GTX 285. They don't think it's much, but you know what? This thing is absolutely incredible. One of the best things about it is that it is extremely overclocked. Lots of headroom for overclocking. The overclock I got on this card, I'm unsure if like they sent me like some freak model that they had, but it went so high. I mean, it overclocked so far. So let's talk about the GTX 285. Now, basically what it is, it's GTX 280. They shrunk it down to 55 nm, so they made it smaller. It was 576 millimeters squared before, now it's 470 square millimeters. So it's much smaller, but everything else is the same. So they packed the same amount of transistors and dies and all sorts of stuff into that architecture, and they just made it smaller. That's going to make it more efficient. It's going to be able to overclock faster and use less power. Now, speaking of power, you will notice right off the bat, one of the things you will notice right there, take a look at the power adapters. See that? A little something different there, huh? Before it was 6 and 8, and that 8's kind of a pain sometimes. Not everybody's got one, but this is 6, 2 6s. And that's pretty good for one of their top of the line cards. Actually, this is their top of the line single GPU card, and there's no 8 at all. There's no 8. That's great. Really cool stuff. Now, power, according to XFX, went from 236 to 183 watts, which is a very nice increase in efficiency on a card like this. Combined with the 2 power connectors, that's actually kind of good. It's green, and of course, it will overclock faster. Now, this is the reference model. There's also the XXX and a bunch of other overclocked versions of it. But dealing with factory frequencies and compared to the GTX 280, let's go over the specs. I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit of both. First of all, GPU core 602 on the 280. This is 648, which is very nice increase. 50 hertz increase, very good. Shaders went from 1296 to 1476, which again is a good jump, okay? It still has 1 gigabyte of DDR3 memory, GDDR3 if you want to be very particular. It was originally clocked at 1107 on the GTX 280. Now it's at 1242, which is fantastic. Also, 512 megabyte bus, 32 ROPS. Everything else pretty much stayed the same. Now, what you will notice is that this thing does overclock better. I got the core clocking this to over 775 megahertz. That's like more than 100 hertz of overclock, which is ridiculous. I got the shaders to 1680 and the memory to 1315, which is huge. Now, a 10% increase in frequencies on the regular GTX 285 versus the 280 is going to give you about a 10% increase in performance, usually in benchmarks, but I saw something more about 13 to 15% increase, and when you're overclocking another 10%, you're talking about almost a quarter more performance on a nasty overclocked GTX 285 versus a factory clocked GTX 280. All right, so let's take a look at some of these quick benchmarks I got. Now, I did this against the GTX 280 because I wanted to know the difference between the regular 280 and the 55nm 285. I wanted to see how overclocking affected it, and I wanted to see, how the added frequency helped. So, first game is Call of Duty 4, maxed out, 1920 by 1200, highest settings you can possibly do. The GTX 280 pulled 85 frames per second. We saw a 16% increase on the GTX 285 to 99 frames per second. So 10% increase in frequencies, 16% gain in performance. That's very impressive. The next game was Crisys. Now, this is not Crisys Warhead. It's the original Crisys. Again, high settings, 19 by 1200, 2 times anti-aliasing, 2 times anthoscopic filtering. We saw 37 frames per second on the GTX 280, and we saw 41 on the 285, which is a 10% increase. Again, that's about right. Frequency to performance, increase is about right. Now, let's go to the next game. Things change a little bit more. This is incredible. Unreal Tournament 3, again, 19 by 12, 4x AA, 4x AF, 202 on the GTX 280, which is a very high number. The game is not particularly taxing on your GPU, but look at this ridiculous increase. 278 frames per second on the GTX 285. That's an increase of 37%. And again, they didn't really change much. They just increase those frequencies. So very impressive benchmarks. So the GTX 285 is definitely an awesome card. It's here to stay. You saw over 7.6% of GPU frequency increase, 13.9% shader increase, and 12.2% memory increase, but you're seeing up to 20 and 25% increases in performance for those slight increases in frequency. Now, also, the card runs cooler. It's still very quiet. The solution on here for cooling is very similar to GTX 280. You will notice, though, on the back panel, there is no back panel anymore, how there used to be. There was that black plate that was here. That's gone. Right there is where your core goes, obviously. Boom, right there. And everything else is about the same. You will notice that it does have the 6 pins, again, right there. So it's a little bit different to have 6 pins versus an 8 and a 6, but that's actually a very welcome change because it's going to make the board a lot easier for a lot of people to use without having to get an adapter, which if you did need, usually would come in the box, but was still a pain. It made your case management look ugly. And besides that, everything else is pretty much the same. You will notice right over here, you do have the same type of DVIs with the S-Video, and you do get one of these little dongles to go with it, a breakaway dongle. It goes from S-Video to component, so you can do 1080i. You also get DVI to VGA, for your 15-pin in case you have an older monitor, and you get the 6-pin to 2 4-pin Molex connectors, which are nice too in case you even don't have that second PCI Express 6-pin. You can get an extra one from here using your Molexes. So excellent card by far. I will say that it's one of the best cards I've ever overclocked. If you don't need to have the dual GPUs, you don't want to go crazy, it's amazing. If you have a high-res monitor, this thing loves to be run at 1920 by 1200 and 2560 by 1600. It loves filters. All the margins of performance of increases got just that much bigger. They opened the gap even further when you turn on filters. So it was really good, and it overclocked like crazy, and the performance increases is when you overclocked, where again, even if it's a 10% factory overclock versus a GTX 280, it got even faster than that when you overclocked it past that. So it was really impressive to overclock. Huge numbers on GPU core clock as well as the shader clock. It's absolutely absurd. So if you want a single GPU card, this is awesome. The GTX 285 from XFX, go get it. For more information on the XFX Geforce GTX 285 video card, type in P450-0285 into the search engine of any of these major retailers. For Computer TV, I'm Albert.